At any rate, when I was asked to come and speak, the bulk of my research recently has been on the American Revolution as we get ready to do a display at the Armory. And so it was on my mind, and also it's been kind of a curiosity. I mean, I personally was born in Concord, and I've grown up here and lived in Massachusetts my entire life, and for whatever reason, I just never gave a crap about the American Revolution. I don't know. I was always a Civil War guy, sorry. But you know, the 250th kind of put, you know, my butt in gear and started really digging into things, and of course focusing on Springfield. And initially getting into the topic, you know, there's not much there. I mean, you know, you look in sources now, Mueller comes to mind, where there might be a sentence or two about what went on at Springfield, and most certainly everybody here is probably familiar with the arms manufactory that got started in 1794. But there was actually quite a bit of activity that went on for the 20 years prior to that. So this research is really preliminary and is kind of an overall overview. But hopefully this is the start of something where we can dig in a little bit more. I know there's more opportunities for research and perhaps more opportunities to identify things that actually came out of Springfield during that time period, which would be wonderful because there's very little, at least at our museum, from items from that era. So with that, the story of the arsenal at Springfield starts with the siege of Boston and the foundation of the Continental Army. I will use this context to introduce three main principles of the arsenal at Springfield. So first up is a guy named Ezekiel Cheever. After the formation of the Continental Army, deliberations ensued regarding the operation of the new force. Considerations included, of course, the supply of ordnance and weaponry, as well as the accoutrements needed by the Army to operate them. And on August 17, 1775, Washington announced in general orders that, quote, Mr. Ezekiel Cheever is appointed commissary of artillery stores attached to the Army. Cheever is about 50 years old, was responsible for collecting ordnance material and keeping up-to-date inventories of stores and providing regular returns to General Washington on issues. Washington said, quote, all arms are to be delivered to Mr. Commissary Cheever for inspection, who is to report their number and fine goodness before they are delivered out of his store. And that's actually a receipt in Washington's papers from Cheever for taking in 12 firelocks and other material. Next up is Captain Joseph Ayers, who led a company of artificers in 1775. Not much is known about Mr. Ayers personally, but a list of work his company had performed up to November of 1775 is in Washington's papers, and it showcases the skill of him and his men. The list shows a large variety of wagons, carriages, and wheels made by Ayers' company, which may be expected, but the crew built quite a few of defensive works. That's fuzzy. Oh well. They report felling timber and splitting out spokes for the construction of 63 chevaux de frise. They also processed 1,954 board feet of pine timber, which they turned into 73 sentry boxes, which they placed around the American line. Additionally, they built artillery platforms at ports number 1 and 2, meaning either Cambridge or Roxbury. Other work performed including building repairs, ammunition chests, as well as 22 garrison carriages for 4, 6, 9, 18, and 24-pound cannon tubes. They even produced 2 lathes, one of which had a footwheel. Of course, this activity was done under the guidance of Richard Gridley as Chief of Artillery and Chief Engineer, though this same month that this report came out and was given to General Washington, November 1775, was when Washington replaced Gridley with Henry Knox as Colonel of Artillery. Lieutenant Colonel David Mason related, quote, I personally like and I even admire Colonel Gridley. He's a devoted patriot who risked his life for our cause. Unfortunately, many of my men don't like him. His sons have been court-martialed for cowardice, and Gridley has appointed them either above other more competent officers. Some officers blamed the colonel for the misdeeds of his son, and some the outcome of the battle itself. And he, of course, is talking about Bunker Hill. This broad loss of confidence was one of the big reasons why Gridley and his advanced age was why he was ousted. And that guy who had that quote, there he is, David Mason, and he's our third principal at Springfield Arsenal. He would become, he was a painter by trade, and a young artillery lieutenant at Fort William Henry during the French and Indian War. And this portrait is from about that time period. On his return home from that time period, actually after the French and Indian War, he founded an independent artillery unit in 1763, and he actually still had command of about 14 cannon in Salem when the war broke out, and he was able to evade capture and join the Army after Concord and Lexington. After Gridley's departure, Lieutenant Colonel Mason was actually more senior to Knox, but reportedly said he would prefer to serve under Knox's command as second lieutenant colonel. Mason fully participated in the siege. One account related, quote, on the nights of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of March, 1776, a vigorous cannonading was being kept up by the colonial artillery to divert the enemy's attention while Dorchester Heights was being occupied. On the 3rd night, while Washington himself was present, a brass gun exploded, and Lieutenant Colonel Mason was wounded. Mason, like Cheever, was no young buck. In fact, after the British evacuation, Mason had not recovered from his wounds sufficiently enough to follow Knox and the rest of the artillery to New York by way of New London, Connecticut, and he was given permission to go overland and meet the Army at its rendezvous. By June 1776, Knox had arrayed 121 artillery pieces in strategic locations around New York City, and most of them would be lost in less than 6 months, as the British Army pushed the Continentals back into Pennsylvania, putting all supplies and material that was not transported with the Army in serious danger. As the Continental Army made plans for Christmas counterattack, both Washington and Knox thought about long-term logistics in the next campaign season. Washington wrote to Ezekiel Cheever, who was in Peekskill, New York, with the bulk of supplies. He said, quote, all stores are to be deposited in careful order in some safe place near the winter quarters of the troops on the east side of Hudson's River. But where would those stores be placed safely? Cheever was in Peekskill, which was not all that safe, as demonstrated several months later by an effective British raid. But Henry Knox had a plan. Prior to the assault on Trenton, Knox penned a letter to Congress describing his ideal organization of a corps of artillery that included a system of ordnance supply. In addition to 5 battalions of artillery, Knox also lobbied for, quote, magazines and laboratories for the reception and preparation of military stores of every species be formed in Hartford, Connecticut, and Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, so that each laboratory there be, besides the persons to prepare the stores, a sufficient number of able artificers to make ammunition wagons, tumbrils, spare carriages for cannon, etc., etc. With Washington's blessing and support, Congress endorsed Knox's plan, giving him the rank of brigadier general to take charge of the expanded operation. However, Congress wished to have the delegates decide where the actual locations of the magazines and laboratories would be. On December 27, 1776, Congress passed a resolution selecting Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and Brookfield, Massachusetts, to be locations for the arsenals. Later, from winter quarters in Morristown, Washington ordered Congress's resolve put into motion, for the most part. While Congress had decided on Brookfield, Massachusetts, Washington decided to ignore them. And Knox wanted Hartford to be the spot, so Washington ordered him there on January 16th, 1777. Washington said, quote, you are to repair to Hartford and Connecticut and there provide and contract for such buildings, materials, and artificers as you think necessary for the exigencies of the Grand Continental Army, also having reference to the supply of the Army to the northward, which perhaps must be drawn from the magazines and laboratories at Hartford. So Hartford is the place. But Knox's trip north was about more than the placement of arsenals. He was also to go to Boston to check in on the arrangements of several new regiments that were being raised by Massachusetts. Knox's route from Hartford to Boston also took him through Springfield, Massachusetts. Likely his first time back in town since he dragged the noble train of artillery from Fort Ticonderoga a year earlier. It was there that he seemed to have an epiphany. Writing to General Nathaniel Greene, Knox suddenly came to the conclusion that Springfield, quote, was the best place in all the 4 New England states for a laboratory, cannon foundry, etc. Once Knox came back home in Boston on February 1st, he begged his commander to recognize Springfield and not Hartford as the ideal location. Demonstrating the faith Washington had in his chief of artillery, he fully backed Knox again, telling him to proceed. Quote, "If Brookfield is preferred to Springfield," he said, "I desire you may proceed with the works in the latter place, and I will inform Congress of the necessity of this variation from their resolve." A few days later, Washington sent that letter to Congress. However, the initial resolve had initially reached Massachusetts, who were making arrangements in Brookfield. Knox penned an explanation to Governor James Bowdoin about the reasons he preferred Springfield. Basically, he said Springfield is closer to water. It's closer to the Hudson's River and the Northern Department. Springfield has many streams which have a number of sawmills, and timber is cheaper to procure. Shops and stores are already available in Springfield, and Springfield is more plentiful with subsistence, and so rations are much easier to acquire. And finally, he said, "And when the buildings and magazines, etc., shall be erected in a complete manner on the plain just above Springfield is perhaps one of the most proper spots in America on every account." Knox explained that he immediately put artificers to work in whatever buildings could be found in Springfield, which means that activity started in the town in late January or early February of 1777. And Congress finally passed an updated resolution naming Springfield as the final location on April 14th. For those familiar with the arrangement of Springfield Armory today, the main campus is indeed on the plain above the hill above the town. However, construction work on the building did not begin until 1778, so nearly all early work took place in the actual town wherever empty stores and workshops were available. As we'll see later, this intermingling of Springfield citizenry with Continentals was a major source of friction. But with work starting in earnest, General Washington placed Ezekiel Cheever in Springfield as overall commissary of military stores for the Eastern Department. Knox tapped his old friend, Lieutenant Colonel David Mason, as director of public works to oversee the entire operation, and Joseph Ears, who had built all those defensive works around Boston, was promoted to major and chief artificer to supervise all trades in the production of everything except munitions. These were produced in a laboratory by a company of artillery artificers, nominally part of Benjamin Flowers' regiment. Captain Lieutenant John Bryant was later selected to oversee the laboratory by Knox after Bryant lost his right arm in the fighting around New York City. Before the workers could begin, the laborious effort to relocate supplies and establish the magazines in town began. Some of the earliest supplies would come in from abroad. Though France had yet officially to support the Americans, the country was willing to support the cause, albeit clandestinely. The French frigate Amphitrite arrived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire at the end of April 1777, laden with military goods. Continental agent John Langdon dispatched express riders to Congress and General Washington. Of course, the Amphitrite was just one of several clandestine ships that would bring supplies to the rebellious colonies in 1777, and the states were just as ravenous for these supplies as was the Continental Army. A mix of orders from various authorities sought to scatter the supplies all over New England, but General Washington could not see the logic in such a free-for-all. Writing to Congress, Washington implored, quote, "I think all the military and ordnance stores be moved without a moment's delay to Springfield, or some interior part of the country. Springfield should be the place because the laboratory is there and they will be more convenient to use as exigencies require. In their present situation, their security is questionable, and if an attack should be made in the eastern quarter, their loss is much to be apprehended." And I've got a newspaper clip from the raid on Danbury, which happened that April, and that raid on Peekskill was the previous month, so they were very concerned about the loss of supplies, of course. Thus, the Continental Arsenal at Springfield was established not only as a laboratory and artificer workshop, it would also be the central ordnance repository for everything east of the Hudson River, managing inventory of all sorts of materials while its workers manufactured more. Work could now begin. The first payrolls from the Continental Arsenal at Springfield reveal an ambitious program of manufacturing that was well staffed. Aside from the principal officers and their clerks, there were several operations for specific trades with master tradesmen as captain and a handful of journeymen for each. The May 1777 payroll lists 36 carpenters, 37 blacksmiths, 15 wheelwrights, 15 harness makers, 13 armorers, as well as 2 tin men, 2 painters, 3 turners, 6 nail makers, and 1 sailmaker. With matrosses and other laborers, the total head count was 159. As tools and raw materials came in, the production of the arsenal ramped up in the spring of 1777. 6 or 7 months later, a prisoner of war provided the earliest description of the arsenal at work. A Hessian officer, part of Burgoyne's convention army marching from Saratoga to Cambridge, marveled at the town as he passed through on October 31st, 1777. Springfield is an exceedingly lively little village. This place is a veritable magazine for the storage of weapons for the Americans, and it also has a small but very well-built armory or arsenal. We saw here various parks of artillery with their trains, and among other things, 12 entirely new 4-pounders of French make, which probably came in on the Amphitrite. The store or magazine houses were filled from top to bottom, and workmen of all trades were seen in houses engaged in the manufacture of ammunition wagons, guns, etc. I have seen here wagons which could not have been better made in England, and upon which the RP was painted neatly as the GR. We think RP is Reserve Park for the artillery yard at Springfield. Order prevailed everywhere, and an old man with a wig and an overcoat attracted my special attention by his scolding and the noise that he made. I ascertained that he was the Master General of Ordnance. So it's probably Cheever or Mason. Clearly it was a busy and active place. So what were they doing? Work rolls for the laboratory show a significant mission to roll paper musket cartridges. And if we zoom in on this a little bit, rotating system of duties have each worker on a 6-day work week. 1 day on cooking duty, which is kind of neat. You can see they rotate day to day on who does cooking. And then you can see the basic goal was a dozen per day. And you got some overachievers down here. Basically about 12,000 musket cartridges a week collectively. The other interesting thing on this work log is 2 guys were knocked out because they were just inoculated for smallpox. Let's see, where am I? Other men, they would, other on the list would cut cartridge paper, they would pour musket balls and buckshot, or serve on fatigue duty. Inventories reveal a large number of cartridges generally on hand. Usually the arsenal had around 200,000 musket cartridges available, with the laboratory making up new as ammo boxes were shipped out during a campaign. One inventory from September of 1780 shows 200,323 musket cartridges on hand, plus another 50,088 that they made the previous month. Despite its future as a center for small arms, the arsenal at Springfield supported artillery as well. Serving as the Central Artillery Reserve Park for the Eastern Department, all sorts of artillery tubes were on hand, ranging from heavy 24, 18, and 12-pounders to 6, 4, and 3-pound field guns. The park also included howitzers and mortars, including one persistent 4.5-inch Cohorn, which I believe was the laboratory's eprouvet for testing gunpowder as it came into the magazine. The laboratory manufactured ammunition of all types and in large numbers. While most cast iron projectiles were either imported or made on contract, the laboratory men would fix the round shot for field guns into strap-shot cartridges with a flannel cartridge attached to a wooden sabot. Tin men assigned to the laboratory would fabricate tin canisters and similarly attached a sabot and a flannel powder bag. The laboratory also made the paper cartridges for all sizes. So this is that September 1780 inventory where you can see 3/6 4-pound case shot, 3/6 4-pound strap shot, all ready to go. Paper cartridges are filled. They run out of filled 4-pounder paper cartridges, but you can see in this next section they've got over 3,200 empty paper cartridges. So it's likely they're going to be starting to fill those up again. And then that previous month, they made empty paper cartridges for 12-pounders and 18-pounders. And so they've got the whole array of munitions that they're making at that time. And even interestingly, and this might be what the sailmaker was for, they've got quilted grape here for 4-pounders and 9-pounders. Turners turning foot lathes supported laboratory work by making the sabots or caps that were used for strap and canister shot. They also turned fuses for mortar and howitzer shells of all sizes. Captain John Bryant, in charge of the laboratory, reported his efforts directly to General Knox, who was anxious to stock up on ordnance for the Army before the upcoming campaign in 1781. Bryant said, quote, "The turners have been constantly at work at fuses. I have had the French 9-inch fuses turned near as long as 10-inch, but the composition may be quicker. They will burn from 33 to 35 seconds, agreeable to your honor's orders. I also have stuff for 4,000 fuses and expect some more in a few days." The laboratory also made associated incendiary supplies such as priming tubes, quick match, slow match, and port fires. The artillery was also supported through other artificers at the arsenal. Many cannon tubes, particularly those supplied by the French, came without carriages. It was up to the carpenters, blacksmiths, and wheelwrights to fabricate new carriages of all types. But most often it was for the most numerous 4-pounders, which had all come in from France, which are all over the inventories. They also built hundreds of ammunition wagons, tumbrils, hand carts, and other vehicles to be used by the Army in the field or work around the arsenal. Knox set both arsenals to work prior to the 1779 campaign, writing to Washington in January, quote, "The artillery artificers will make the covered ammunition wagons and traveling forges. I expect they will be able at Carlisle and Springfield to make 200 ammunition wagons by the spring, which in addition to those we already have will be nearly sufficient." Interestingly, speaking of traveling forges, the quality of the work showed in one of them. When accounting for excess supplies and equipment at the end of the war, one forge was so nice, Quartermaster General and future Secretary of War Timothy Pickering could not bear to part with it. Quote, "One of the traveling forges made at Springfield is so extremely well made and the wheels are so excellent, I think it a pity to sell it," he wrote to Henry Knox. Quote, "I will send it to West Point to be lodged with the artillery, and the others I will sell in the manner proposed." The artificers also produced all manner of artillery accoutrements. Inventories are filled with rammers, worms, sponges, as well as the raw materials to make them. Workers also manufactured other tools such as gunners' hammers, nippers, powder horns, and even more common articles like scales and weights, scissors, and lanterns. Somewhat surprisingly, Springfield Arsenal manufactured and maintained equipment for the cavalry as well. Inventories reveal a full assortment of tack and bridle, saddles, curry combs, nose bags, saddle pads, stirrups, and even spurs. The arsenal served as a central supply depot to light dragoons. Just months after the capture and execution of the British spy, John Andre, and the unmasking of Benedict Arnold, Major Benjamin Talmadge and the 2nd Light Dragoons went into winter quarters just to the north of Springfield. Colonel Ezekiel Cheever took in Talmadge's orders to resupply the unit, but did not have the material to fully comply, revealing some of the issues that would come to plague the administration of the site. Cheever wrote to General Washington, quote, "I take the liberty to enclose, Your Excellency, a copy of a return sent me from Northampton by Major Talmadge." And that's that quote from Washington, or that return from Washington's papers. "Whom I informed we only have 10 common saddles, that ye harness makers can do nothing in their way forward of leather. I have repeatedly represented the want of leather, but the men generally are idle for want of stock to employ them." So yeah, this is kind of fuzzy, but Major Talmadge there, you can see in the middle, it's 172 saddles he wants from Springfield, and Ezekiel Cheever has to say, "I only got 10 and I got no leather," which is probably why he wrote to Washington to see what they could do about that. Of course, the harness makers in the company made all the leather goods in Springfield, including the horse and dragoon equipment. They also made other accoutrements as well. Of note are leather cartridge boxes for the infantry. In 1 month alone, the arsenal reported manufacturing 500 new construction cartridge boxes. But back to Major Talmadge's dragoons. They also needed pistols repaired by the company of armorers at Springfield, and Cheever was also short on another critical supply, coal. And this is a great quote where he's telling Washington that they need to procure coal in the old way. So the blacksmiths would make an axe or a plowshare in exchange for several bushels of coal to be able to fire the furnaces and do other repairs and manufacture work. Times were getting tight as the war progressed. But in contrast to the later Springfield Armory, there were only a dozen armorers stationed at the Continental Arsenal, but they certainly kept busy with all types of work. On establishment of the arsenal, their first major task was sorting through the variety of muskets sent by France in 1777. Prior to the official French involvement in the war, it appears quality was not always the highest. On June 30th, 1777, General William Heath, commanding the Eastern Department, reported to General Washington, quote, we find many of the French arms bad in the locks. There are many complaints of the breaking of mainsprings, the cocks, and in particular the breaking of the pin or screw that fixes the cock to the plate. Colonel Crafts informs me that 33, which he proved, 16 burst. The number of this sort, however, was small, but about 100 and odd in the whole. I suppose them to have been made for the guinea trade. So apparently France wasn't sending its best, at least initially. But surely the armorers at Springfield had their hands full as they worked to take the muskets and parts received from France and other sources and fabricate serviceable arms for Continental service. Inventories reveal a steady cycle of firearms, good and bad, through the stores. In 1778, an inventory showed 4,840 serviceable muskets on hand, in addition to 3,535 muskets deemed non-serviceable. By 1780, the amount of unserviceable muskets was reported at 4,895. Interestingly, the inventory, which you see here, also reported an accumulation of parts, including 19 chests of pistol barrels, 3 chests of carbine barrels, and 16,389 loose gun barrels. They also reported 22 chests of brass and iron gun mountings. Springfield reported a number of working firearms in the summer of 1780 available for issue. The number include 19 chests of French muskets, 1 chest of Hessian muskets, and 38 chests of Rampart muskets. Gotta love those Rampart muskets. The tallies also include 13 rifles, 304 carbines, and 2,466 pistols, the latter two specifically listed as part of the arsenal's focus on dragoon armaments. In that same section, interestingly, my favorite, is, 67 sabers, 145 marine cutlasses, and 1,596, I don't know if you can read it there, but the classification is old rusty swords. Interestingly, and this might be a source of future research, I don't know how much we can do on it, but right here in the middle, there are 24 new stocked muskets, which are kind of interesting, indicating probably the work of the armorers there, likely making use of the spare parts in store. While fabricating muskets completely from scratch was not done at the government facility until 1795, they were clearly at least assembling muskets as best they could. Indeed, General Washington advised General Knox to bring up a Connecticut gunsmith, Elijah Buell, who will, quote, undertake to stock a number of the gun barrels at Springfield and repair the old arms. I think it would be best for you to give orders to the officer superintending the laboratory there to have the barrels sufficiently proved before they are delivered, as I suspect that they are most of them of the trash kind. Perhaps General Washington was thinking of these, the remnants of those old guinea trade guns that General Heath had mentioned several years before. So it appears the arsenal at Springfield was quite productive, at least as much as supply shortages affected the ability to do work. Unfortunately, much time and effort was lost due to ineffective management and convoluted chain of command. Within the first year, relations between the town of Springfield and the Continental station there became strained. With no government buildings on the hill yet, nearly 200 Continentals were in very close proximity to the citizens of the town. A series of petty accusations were brought forward against the principals of the public works. Major heirs stood accused of using public boards, nails, and labor to repair his family's house in the next town over, therefore not on public property. Lieutenant Colonel William Smith, the Deputy Quartermaster General in Springfield, was accused of building several boats for a Continental ferry across the Connecticut River in direct competition to the local ferry. Several officers were observed joyriding on the Connecticut River in one of the boats, which was named the Lady Washington. Lieutenant Colonel Mason received the bulk of accusations. Primarily, the town accused him of utilizing public property for personal items. He had several pairs of shoes made from leather in the stores, not only from himself, but for his wife and 4 daughters. Sometimes cobblers in the town made the shoes. Other times men from the company of harness makers made them on their own time. The company of carpenters made tables and chairs and chests of drawers, and the wheelwrights made wheels and a 1-horse shay for the Mason family. Springfield was outraged and had enough influence to force a court-martial by the Continental Army. Ultimately, everyone was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the general shifting of the seat of war to the south further isolated the arsenal, aggravating tensions and making oversight much more challenging. Washington could not have been pleased to receive a list of artificers confined at Springfield in the summer of 1779. Most were charged with disobeying orders. 8 carpenters, 3 wheelwrights, 5 blacksmiths, along with 1 deserter from the laboratory were reported to the commander-in-chief, and it was also reported that the company of harness makers outright refused to work under Major Ayres's command any longer. General Horatio Gates, having taken command of the Eastern Department after the Conway Cabal debacle, received a letter from Springfield. Cheever, Mason, and Ayres reported that some men, quote, in the department obstinately persist in not doing any work until they can have bread allowed them, as they term it. They persist in it that they will not accept rice in lieu of flour. Washington himself masterfully smoothed over the situation, but this was really a mess, and Mason, Ayres, and Cheever were not in control of their operation. The final straw came with John Collins. Cheever's deputy commissary of military stores was caught stealing and selling saltpeter, a critical and quite scarce ingredient required in gunpowder and other incendiaries. Collins, who you can see his signature there, this is the guy in charge of making the inventories, who's skimming saltpeter. He had arranged with intermediaries in Palmer and Sutton, Mass, to sell over 1,300 pounds of saltpeter for 9 pounds sterling a pound, which is a stunning amount of money, which Collins was to receive payment in cash, sugar, and rum. Though Collins was ultimately caught and cashiered from service and the saltpeter was returned to Springfield, the affair prompted response at the highest levels. Springfield was already in hot water, and the exasperated Continental Congress officially recorded, quote, "The affairs at Springfield remain in the most deranged situation." For what it's worth, Springfield wasn't the only post with its problems. Previous years were an experiment, more or less, of organization for logistics and military supplies. After 2 or 3 years of operation, Henry Knox's vision for the Ordnance Department, as it came to be known, needed a top-down analysis and evaluation. The changes were swift and merciless. Officers at all posts, including Carlisle and Philadelphia, were dismissed, and the whole operation was put under the supervision of one person, Samuel Hodgson, the new Commissary General of Military Stores. General Ezekiel Cornell, sent by Congress with full autonomy to rearrange Springfield as he saw fit, announced in June 1781, quote, "Luke Bliss, Esquire, of Springfield is appointed Commissary of Military Stores in that place and is to be obeyed and respected accordingly. Captain John Bryant will command and superintend the laboratory and take orders from the Commissary of Military Stores." And here's our boy Bryant. William Hawes, Captain William Hawes will command and superintend the artificers of every denomination and take orders in the same manner as Captain Bryant, as directed. Cornell continued, quote, "All and every other officer not mentioned above and of a higher rank than sergeant or foreman of the Department of the Commissary of Military Stores, officers of artificers, commandants, superintendents, or by whatever name they may be known, belonging to or connected with the Commissary of Military Stores, laboratory, or artificers at Springfield are dismissed from any further service." Thank goodness there wasn't a district court in Washington in those days. Those departing, including Mason, Cheever, and Ayres, were given 2 weeks to settle their affairs before all payment and rations were completely cut off. Serious consideration was made to completely shutter the operations at Springfield. However, the location still remained the most proper place in America, as General Knox termed it. As such, the government continued to invest in the site, funding a massive brick powder magazine for long-term storage of gunpowder and munitions. With the Treaty of Paris, the site slimmed down operations even further. Captain Hawes resigned his commission, and that position of a commissary of military stores was no longer needed. This left Captain John Bryant as the sole commissioned officer in the site, mainly reporting to Samuel Hodgson in Philadelphia, though there is a remarkable amount of communication directly between Bryant and Henry Knox, now the Secretary of War. In fact, Bryant wrote to General Knox with elation in 1790, announcing the birth of a son, whom he named Henry Knox Bryant. With the help of contractors and other hired hands, Bryant managed the stores in Springfield so that they could be called upon at any time. Inventories reveal much the same types of material in store, including large quantities of powder, artillery projectiles, cannon of all sorts, and of course, new French infantry muskets. It was Captain Bryant who worked feverishly to secure these stores behind militia defenses as Daniel Shays and his regulators marched toward the arsenal in January of 1787. When Congress authorized the establishment of a federal arms factories in 1794, the musket-making operation was pretty much laid right on top of the existing arsenal. Bryant continued in his role, even bringing on artificers for contract work reminiscent of activity during the Revolution, which included making carriages for artillery, facilitating casting of new cannon, maintaining old and brand new muskets made at Springfield Armory, and shipping armaments to various units. The most entertaining shipment I found was in 1797, when the entire stock of 24-pound cannon tubes and around 1,400 round shot were sent by Captain Bryant from Springfield to Boston, where they would be used to outfit a brand new U.S. Navy frigate, the USS Constitution. By the War of 1812, when that guy was earning its nicknames, Captain Bryant was well into old age. He was over 70 years old and had been working at the arsenal since at least 1778, the previous 34 years. When Henry Leckler, the new superintendent at Springfield Armory, entered on duty in 1813, he had orders to terminate the captain. In an interesting statement, Bryant showed that the addition of the armory function had no relation to the arsenal as far as he was concerned, so he appealed directly to the Secretary of War, John Armstrong. By the appointment I hold, Bryant wrote, I have never thought myself so much under the control of the armory superintendent as to warrant him in this proceeding. He said, I am sensible that my usefulness to the public has greatly diminished by the infirmities of age. But as the duties of this office under the present arrangement are not arduous, I had flattered myself from the number of years I had been in service that I should be allowed to end my days where I had spent my strength. Unfortunately, the long and distinguished service record wasn't enough to save his job. Bryant received a terse reply from Secretary of War John Armstrong at the end of May 1814. Quote, you are not deranged from office on account of misconduct, Armstrong explained. The place you filled is not necessary to the public service. To have it continued would be establishing a precedent for sinecures. The old arrangements were changing, and clearly the manufacture of muskets was the new priority. The old role of the Ordnance Depot and Artillery Park would be reduced. Springfield Armory was now in full effect. It soon would dramatically overshadow all activity prior to 1794. But despite all the fits and starts in Springfield, as the colonies broke into rebellion and the new country and the new army figured out what it was and how it worked, the Continental Arsenal was certainly an important part of those events, and certainly Springfield Armory would not have existed without it either. With further study, hopefully we find out more about the Arsenal period and perhaps uncover more previously unknown information and better identify surviving pieces in all our collections. Thank you.